Aspire to a clean career, leaving no shame for descendants. Hello everyone. Welcome to Encountering Chinese, Case Stories, Cases Judged by Bao Gong. Today, I'm going to tell you two short stories. The first story is titled, The Wooden Stamp. Once, Bao Gong and his team of constables set out to patrol various regions, heading towards Hunan. Along the way, they passed a remote area called Henkeng, where the nearest paths were small mountain trails and there were hardly any people around. At noon, suddenly, a swarm of flies and gnats flew towards them, circling around Bao Gong's carriage 3 times. He tried to use his whip to drive them away, but while they scattered temporarily, they quickly regrouped. After several attempts, Bao Gong began to suspect something. He thought to himself, "Flies and gnats often gather around corpses. With so many here, could there be a body nearby? I need to check. If it's an animal, that's one thing, but if it's a human body, it could indicate foul play." Thinking this, he called Constable Li Bao and said, "These flies and gnats won't leave my carriage. It seems there might be a corpse nearby. You and the others go investigate the area, and if you find anything, report back immediately." The constables followed the direction of the flies and gnats. After walking less than 3 miles, they arrived at a hillside near a pine tree, where the swarm was gathering more densely, and the ground appeared to have been disturbed. Seeing this, Li Bao immediately ran back to report to Bao Gong. Bao Gong went with the constables to investigate and ordered Li Bao to dig into the disturbed earth. They indeed found a corpse beneath it. The body appeared normal but was male, with no obvious external wounds, though the lower body was ruptured and swollen. Bao Gong inferred that the death was not natural and that the man had clearly been murdered. He then searched the victim's belongings and found a small wooden stamp on the waistband, realizing the man was a fabric merchant. He recorded the findings, took the wooden stamp as evidence, and instructed them to bury the body again before leaving. That evening, Bao Gong and his group arrived at a pavilion outside the city, where they were welcomed by some officials. Bao Gong inquired about their origins, and one of them replied, "We are officials from Chenlia County, under the jurisdiction of the Hunan government. The county magistrate heard you would be passing through, so he sent us to welcome you." After hearing this, Bao Gong instructed them, "Tomorrow, I will be handling cases in your county, which will take several days. If there are any cases during this time, I will address them all at once. Please inform the county magistrate to be prepared." The official complied and accompanied Bao Gong into the city, where they settled down at the inn. The next day, after the county magistrate had arranged everything at the office, Bao Gong took his seat to begin his work. He thought to himself, "The body I discovered yesterday is not far from here, and the victim seems to have died recently. It's likely the murderer hasn't left yet." With this in mind, he summoned the county constables and instructed, "Are there any merchants selling quality fabric around here? I want to buy some cloth." The constables replied that there was a well-known fabric merchant nearby named Zhang Kai, who people often went to for their fabric needs. Bao Gong then summoned Zhang Kai to the court and asked, as a fabric merchant, what type of fabric do you primarily sell? Zhang Kai answered, the cloth produced in Hunan is excellent. I conduct business here, and whatever type of fabric my customers need, I help them find it. Bao Gong said. Then take samples of all types of fabric and bring them to me. If I find something suitable, I'll buy it. Zhang Kai agreed and selected several high-quality fabrics to present to Bao Gong. As Bao Gong examined each piece, he discovered a small mark on one fabric that matched the pattern of the wooden stamp found on the corpse. He felt a surge of delight and said, I don't want the other fabrics, I'll take 20 rolls of this one. Zhang Kai was surprised and replied, this fabric was brought by a customer named Li San from Taikang County a few days ago. I've never sold it before. Since you want to buy it, I'll help you find him for a good price. Bao Gong thought for a moment and said, that sounds too troublesome. Why not invite him here so I can speak with him in person? Zhang Kai took his leave and soon returned with Li San and 20 rolls of the same fabric. Bao Gong took the fabric and again retrieved the wooden stamp, comparing it to the marks on Li San's fabric, and confirmed they matched perfectly. He then asked Li San, are you the only one selling this fabric? Do you have any companions? Li San replied, there are 4 of us in total. We plan to sell our fabric soon, and the others are at the shop right now. Bao Gong immediately sent someone to summon the other 3, instructing them to kneel in the courtroom. Looking at them, he softly stroked his beard and feigned a smile, saying, you group of wicked men who kill and rob. Don't you know that someone has reported you? A few days ago, you murdered a fabric merchant, stole his goods, and buried his body under a pine tree near Hunkang. Why don't you confess everything quickly? Upon hearing Bao Gong's words, Li San's face changed drastically, and he hurriedly protested. We bought this fabric from someone else a few days ago. There was no robbery or murder involved. Bao Gong then produced the small wooden stamp, comparing the designs on it with those on the fabric, and declared it as strong evidence. The thieves, already feeling guilty, were further terrified by the evidence and quickly confessed to the robbery and murder. After the investigation, Bao Gong organized the case into a report. He ultimately ruled that Li San was the main perpetrator responsible for murdering the fabric merchant and sentenced him to death. The other 3 were deemed accomplices and were to be exiled to a remote area for military service. Zhang Kai, being merely an intermediary in the fabric trade and having no connection to the case, was released immediately. After the verdict, the deceased's son learned of the matter and hurriedly came to appeal for justice. Bao Gong informed him of the location where the body was buried and returned all the fabric. The son was deeply grateful, bowing in thanks to Bao Gong before taking his father's remains home for burial. Bao Gong's handling of the case left everyone present in admiration, as the saying goes. Justice for grievances is never overlooked. The second story is titled, Reviewing the Will. In the capital city, there lived an old man named Wang Jian, who was quite wealthy. Wang was known for his generosity and willingness to help others. Whenever neighbors or relatives faced difficulties, he would lend a hand and actively assist in mediating disputes. He would always step in to discourage fights and strive for reconciliation during arguments between neighbors, earning him great respect and affection from those around him. Unfortunately, Wang Jian was already 78 years old and had only one daughter named Yang. After she came of age, she married a man named Yang Qing. Although Yang was intelligent, he was extremely greedy. Knowing that his father-in-law had no sons, he had long harbored intentions to seize Wang's wealth. He often boasted to his friends while drinking, saying, "Inheritance is meant for sons. My father-in-law is old and won't have any more children. His fortune will inevitably come to me." Wang Jian heard these remarks and felt uncomfortable, but since he had no sons, he could only swallow his resentment. The neighbors, upon learning of Yang Qing's attitude, felt indignant for Wang Jian, saying, "Mr. Wang is truly a good man, but he has no sons. It's unfair that his wealth will go to a greedy man like his son-in-law." Unexpectedly, 2 years later, a miracle occurred. Wang Jian's concubine gave birth to a son when he was nearly 80 years old. Wang was overjoyed and named the child Wang Long. Upon hearing the news, the villagers came to congratulate him, but Yang Qing felt furious inside. Although he forced a smile on the outside, he was deeply displeased. Wang Jian worried that, given his old age and the child's youth, if he were to pass away, his son might be bullied by Yang Qing. He pondered, thinking, "Since Yang Qing is after my fortune, I might as well let him manage it. That way, he won't harm my son." 3 months later, Wang Jian fell seriously ill and, knowing his end was near, called Yang Qing to his bedside. With tears in his eyes, he said, "I have only one son and one daughter in my life. Although you are not my biological son, you are part of our family. Now that I'm old and my son is still so young, I fear I won't have the chance to see him grow up. How about this? I will entrust all my family's wealth to you, and you can help take care of my children." As he spoke, Wang Jian took out a will and read it to Yang Qing. Since the sentence in the will lacked punctuation, one possible interpretation was, "An 80-year-old man has a son, but people say he is not my son. The family estate and land are entrusted entirely to the son-in-law, and outsiders are not allowed to dispute it." Yang Qing was overjoyed upon seeing this and quickly tucked the will away, formally taking over the Wang family's estate. Soon after, Wang Jian passed away, and Yang Qing got what he wished for, control of all Wang Jian's wealth. Time flew by, and over 20 years had passed. Wang Long had grown into an adult and was well versed in the ways of the world. He began to ponder, if my father's wealth can be managed by his son-in-law, why can't I, as my father's biological son, take over this estate? With this thought in mind, he asked relatives to persuade his brother-in-law, Yang Qing, hoping to reclaim the family fortune. Upon hearing this, Yang Qing flew into a rage and said, all this property was personally entrusted to me by my father-in-law, and his will is quite clear. Moreover, Wang Long may not even be my father-in-law's biological son. Why should he contest the Wang family's estate with me? Yang Qing ignored Wang Long's request, and the matter dragged on. Eventually, unable to endure it any longer, Wang Long filed a lawsuit with the local authorities. After several hearings, the county magistrate ruled according to Wang Jian's will, awarding the estate to Yang Qing, which left Wang Long feeling resentful. At that time, Bao Gong was serving in the capital. Wang Long secretly submitted his case to him. Upon reading the case, Bao Gong immediately summoned Yang Qing for questioning, saying, "Why have you been occupying Wang Long's inheritance all these years and still refuse to return it?" Yang Qing defended himself. "These assets were entrusted to me by my father-in-law, and they have nothing to do with Wang Long." Bao Gong scoffed, "But Wang Long is Wang Jian's biological son. Even if Wang Jian had no son, you are just a son-in-law. According to the rules, you have no right to manage the Wang family's property." Yang Qing quickly produced the will as evidence and said, "Look here. My father-in-law's will clearly states, the 80-year-old man has a son, but others say he is not my son. All the family property shall be entrusted to the son-in-law, and outsiders may not contest it." After reviewing the will, Bao Gong laughed heartily, saying, "You've misread it. The will clearly states, the 80-year-old man has a son, but others say he is not my son. All the family property shall be entrusted to him. Son-in-law and outsiders have no right to dispute. This means that Wang Jian's estate should be managed by his biological son." Yang Qing was unwilling to accept this and retorted, "But my father-in-law also wrote that Wang Long is not his son. The will states this very clearly." Bao Gong smiled slightly and replied, "You've been caught up in his wording. He intentionally wrote it that way. The statement, 'The 80-year-old man has a son, but others say he is not my son,' is a question, indicating he does not believe what others say." Yang Qing was still not convinced and argued, "But the will also says, outsiders may not contest it. By that reasoning, apart from me, everyone else is an outsider." Bao Gong shook his head, saying, "Think again. If you look at your own son, would you consider him an outsider?" The outsider in this context refers specifically to son-in-law, meaning you, as the son-in-law, are an outsider and cannot contest property with his biological son. This was your father-in-law's true intention, but since he didn't use proper punctuation, you failed to understand it. Upon hearing this, Yang Qing was left speechless and had no choice but to return all the documents and properties to Wang Long. With this, the case was settled, and the neighbors of Wang Jian felt pleased with the verdict. Alright. Today's case stories, The Wooden Stamp and Reviewing the Will, conclude here. If you liked these stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Feel free to leave a comment and share it with others. See you next time.